The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers, each one filled with representatives from species that had traveled across the stars to be here. Light from distant suns filtered through crystal windows, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floor. It was the most important place in the known galaxy, where decisions that affected trillions of lives were made every single day. Ambassador Carolyn Webb sat in the human section, a small area near the back of the chamber. She had been sitting there for 6 hours now, listening to speech after speech about why humanity should accept the newest proposal. Her legs were tired. Her back ached. But more than anything else, her patience had finally run out. The Velnoxy representative was speaking now. His name was Praxis, and his body was made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it in all directions. His voice came through the translation system as cold and sharp, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "The humans have been part of galactic society for only 200 years, Praxis said. They are children compared to species like my own, who have traveled between stars for 10,000 generations. It would be foolish to grant them the same rights and privileges that we have earned through millennia of service to this council." Carolyn felt her hands tighten into fists beneath the table. Next to her, Danny Ortiz, her young assistant, was taking notes on his datapad. His jaw was clenched so tight that she could see the muscles standing out on his face. "The proposed amendment is fair and reasonable," Praxis continued. "Humanity will be limited to expansion within 12 star systems. They will pay increased tariffs on all trade goods. They will not be permitted to vote on matters concerning the inner sectors. These restrictions will remain in place until the Council determines that humans have proven themselves worthy of greater responsibility." A murmur of agreement rippled through many sections of the chamber. The Maradi delegation, with their long tentacles and bulbous heads, nodded along with the Velnoxy words. The Sindari, covered in thick brown fur, seemed less certain, but remained silent. Carolyn had heard enough. She had heard enough 3 months ago, when the first version of this proposal was introduced. She had heard enough 6 months ago, when the trade restrictions were quietly increased without any vote. She had heard enough a year ago, when human ships were denied access to the fastest travel routes, simply because some council members felt uncomfortable sharing space with the newcomers. She pushed back her chair and stood up. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor seemed impossibly loud in the vast chamber. Thousands of eyes, some of them not even eyes in the human sense, turned to look at her. "Ambassador Webb," said High Arbiter Zelthos from his elevated platform at the center of the room. He was a Kethrani, nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted color depending on his mood. Right now, they were a confused shade of yellow and orange. "You wish to address the council?" "No," Caroline said. Her voice was calm and steady. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times. "I wish to inform the council that the human delegation is leaving." Silence that followed was so complete that Caroline could hear the soft hum of the environmental systems keeping the chamber at a comfortable temperature for dozens of different species. "Leaving?" Zelthos repeated. "I do not understand." "The session is not yet concluded. Humanity is leaving the membership negotiations entirely," Caroline clarified. "We withdraw our application. We withdraw from all pending treaties. We withdraw from this council." Behind her, every member of the human delegation rose to their feet. There were 47 of them in total. Diplomats and advisors and specialists who had worked for years toward the goal of full council membership. Now they stood together, united in this final act. Danny gathered the documents and datapads from the table, placing them neatly in his bag. Linda Patterson, the chief advisor, collected the translation devices. Commander Kyle Bennett, who served as their military liaison, straightened his uniform and stood at attention. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from a dozen species began talking at once. Some called out questions. Others shouted objections. The Velnoxy delegation made sounds of surprise that the translators could not properly convert into human language. "This is highly irregular," Zelthos said, his scales now shifting to an alarmed shade of red. "Ambassador Webb, I must insist that you explain your actions." Carolyn paused at the edge of the human section. She looked up at the High Arbiter, then let her gaze sweep across the vast assembly. So many species, so many worlds, so much history and power and wealth gathered in one place. And for 200 years, humanity had been begging for a seat at this table, accepting scraps and insults and endless delays. No more. For 2 centuries. Humanity has sought partnership with the Galactic Council, Caroline said. Her words were picked up by the chamber's audio systems and broadcast to every corner of the hall. We have shared our technology freely. We have opened our trade routes to your merchants. We have sent our doctors to heal your sick and our engineers to build your infrastructure. We asked only to be treated as equals. She paused, letting the words sink in. Instead, we have been treated as servants, as children, as a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be welcomed. Every year brings new restrictions, new insults, new reasons why humanity must wait just a little longer for the rights that other species take for granted. Praxis made a sound of objection, but Caroline continued without acknowledging him. We are done waiting. We are done begging. If the Galactic Council does not want humanity as a member, then humanity will find its own path among the stars. We do not need your approval. We do not need your permission. We only needed your respect, and that was apparently too much to ask. She turned and walked toward the great doors at the back of the chamber. Her delegation followed in perfect formation, their footsteps echoing on the ancient floor. Representatives from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as the humans made their way through the hall. The Marathi ambassador called out something. But Caroline did not stop to listen. The Sindari trade minister rose from his seat as if to intercept them, then thought better of it and sat back down. Even Praxis, whose crystal body usually hummed with confidence, had gone completely still. The doors of the chamber were massive things, made from metals that had been forged in the hearts of dying stars. They had stood for 10,000 years, welcoming species from across the galaxy to join the greatest alliance ever created. Now they opened one more time. The human delegation walked through without looking back, as the doors sealed behind them. Danny let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like hours. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that was the most terrifying thing I have ever done." Caroline allowed herself a small smile. "The terrifying part hasn't started yet, Danny. That was just the first move. Now we wait to see how they respond." They walked down the corridor toward the docking bays where their ship waited. Behind them, muffled by thick walls and heavy doors, they could hear the chaos continuing in the council chamber. The galaxy would never be the same after today, and that, Caroline thought, was exactly the point. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours of the human delegation walking out of the council chamber, every inhabited world knew what had happened. Communication networks buzzed with speculation. News programs ran constant coverage. On 1,000 different planets, beings of every shape and size asked the same question: what happens now? On the agricultural world of Visser Prime, Administrator Yolith was asking that question with growing panic. She stood in her office, overlooking endless fields of golden grain. Her forearms folded across her chest as she stared at the reports on her display screen. The numbers were bad. The numbers were very, very bad. How is this possible? She asked her assistant, a nervous young Visari named Colvin. How did we become so dependent on the humans without anyone noticing? Colvin shuffled through his documents. It happened slowly, Administrator. Over the past 50 years, human companies gradually took over many essential services. Their freighters now transport 42% of our grain exports. Their engineers maintain our atmospheric processors. Their security consultants trained our entire planetary defense force, and now they are leaving. The human companies have not made any announcements yet, but if humanity withdraws from all council treaties, those companies will no longer be bound by the trade agreements that keep prices stable. Colvin paused, his face pale with worry. Our entire economy could collapse within 6 months. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. On the industrial world of Kareth Station, factory managers realized that human-designed machines produced 60% of their manufactured goods. On the medical planet of Helix 7, doctors discovered that human pharmaceutical companies supplied most of their critical medicines. On the mining colonies of the Outer Reach, engineers learned that human navigation systems guided their ore transports through dangerous asteroid fields. Nobody had planned for this. Nobody had even noticed it happening. The humans had been so eager to prove themselves useful, so willing to take on jobs that other species considered beneath them, they had quietly become essential to the functioning of galactic civilization. Aboard the human vessel, Artemis Dawn, Captain Greg Santos watched the chaos unfold from the safety of deep space. His ship was a mid-sized cruiser, designed for long-range exploration and diplomacy. Right now, it was serving as a temporary headquarters for the human diplomatic corps as they figured out their next move. Lieutenant Adia Fuentes sat at the communications station, her headset pressed tightly against her ears. "Captain," she said, her voice tired from hours of constant work, "we have received 427 transmission requests in the past 6 hours. 14 different species want private talks with Ambassador Webb. The Marathi are offering emergency trade concessions. The Sindari are promising to vote against any Velnoxy proposals. Even the Kethrani High Arbiter has sent 3 personal messages." Greg leaned back in his command chair and rubbed his eyes. "What does the ambassador want to do?" "She says to tell them we will consider their requests." Eventually, a small smile crossed Greg's face. After years of being ignored and dismissed by the council, it felt good to be the ones keeping other species waiting for a change. But he knew this was a dangerous game. Push too hard, and the council might decide that humanity was more trouble than it was worth. Push too little, and they would end up right back where they started, begging for scraps from species that looked down on them. Back on Earth, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Public opinion polls showed that 93% of humans supported the withdrawal from council negotiations. News programs replayed footage of Ambassador Webb walking out of the chamber, her head held high, her delegation marching behind her in perfect order. Politicians who had spent years arguing for patience and diplomacy suddenly changed their tune, claiming they had always believed that humanity deserved better treatment in the city of Houston. An old man named Charlie Reeves sat in his living room watching the coverage. He had been a starship engineer for 40 years before retiring, and he had seen firsthand how other species treated human workers. The dismissive comments, the assumption that humans could not be trusted with important tasks, the constant need to prove themselves over and over again. "About time," he muttered to his cat who was sleeping on the couch next to him. "Should have done this decades ago." His granddaughter, a young woman named Sophie, was visiting from the academy where she was training to become a pilot. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Do you think there will be a war, Grandpa?" Charlie shook his head. "No, sweetheart. There won't be a war. The council needs us too much for that. They just didn't realize it until now." He was right about one thing. The council was not thinking about war. They were thinking about survival. In the emergency session that followed the human withdrawal, representatives from dozens of species spoke about the economic damage that would result if humanity truly cut ties with galactic civilization. The Marathi ambassador, a female named Valatha, presented data showing that human medical technology had increased life expectancy across 40 different worlds. Without access to human doctors and medicines, millions of beings could die from diseases that had been curable for decades. The Sindari Trade Minister Harath explained that human freighters carried 30% of all goods moving through the central trade routes. If those ships stopped flying, prices would increase dramatically. And some colonies might face shortages of essential supplies. Even species that had traditionally supported the Velnix position began to waver. The Kasori, a small but influential species known for their wisdom, sent word that they were reconsidering their alliance with Praxis and his crystal people. The Thasari formally requested that the council began immediate negotiations to bring humanity back to the table. Praxis himself remained defiant. "The humans are bluffing," he insisted, his crystal body pulsing with colored light. "They need us as much as we need them. Within a month, they will come crawling back, and then we can negotiate from a position of strength." But others were not so sure. Grandmother Ven, the elderly Kasori diplomat who had served on the council for over a century, gathered a group of like-minded representatives in a private chamber away from prying eyes. "The Valnoxi are fools," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "They pushed the humans too far, and now we all must pay the price. We cannot wait for them to come back to us. We must go to them, and we must offer them everything they want." A young Thessari delegate named Pell raised his hand nervously. "Everything? Even full voting rights? Even access to the inner trade routes?" Grandmother Ven fixed him with her multiple eyes, each one reflecting a different point of light. "Young one, let me explain something that the Valnoxi have never understood. The humans are not children. They are not newcomers. They are a species that went from primitive tools to interstellar travel in less than 10,000 years. They adapt faster than any other species in the known galaxy. They solve problems that we have struggled with for millennia." She paused, letting her words sink in. "If we make them our enemies, they will find ways to survive without us. They will build their own trade routes. They will create their own alliances. And in 100 years or 1,000 years, they will be stronger than we are. The question is not whether to give them what they want. The question is whether we are smart enough to make them our partners before it is too late." The room fell silent. Outside, ships continued to arrive and depart from the council station, carrying beings who had no idea that their entire civilization might be changing forever. And somewhere in the depths of space, the human delegation waited, patient and calm, for the galaxy to realize what it had lost: the emergency session of the Galactic. Council had been going on for 3 days straight. High Arbiter Zelthos had not slept in all that time. His scales, which usually shifted through beautiful patterns of color, had turned a dull gray from exhaustion. He stood at his elevated platform, in the center of the chamber, and watched as the greatest alliance in galactic history tore itself apart. The Marathi delegation had just accused the Valnoxi of deliberately sabotaging relations with humanity. Valatha, the Marathi ambassador, waved her tentacles in furious gestures as she spoke. "Your petty jealousy has cost us everything," she shouted, her words translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. "For decades, you blocked every attempt to grant the humans fair treatment. You insisted on restrictions that made no sense. You pushed and pushed until they had no choice but to leave." Praxis, the Valnoxi representative, pulsed with angry red light. "We were protecting the stability of the council," he replied coldly. "The humans are unpredictable. They breed too quickly. They spread too fast. If we had given them everything they wanted, they would have overwhelmed us within a few generations. And now they will overwhelm us anyway," Valatha shot back. "But instead of being our partners, they will be our competitors. Congratulations, Praxis. Your fear of human success has guaranteed it." The argument continued for another hour. Other species joined in, taking sides based on old alliances and older grudges. The Sundari supported the Marathi. The Kathrani tried to remain neutral, but were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The smaller species, who had often been ignored by the major powers, watched with growing concern as the foundations of galactic order cracked and crumbled in a secure room beneath the main chamber. Grandmother Ven met with her coalition of worried diplomats. There were 17 of them now, representing species from every corner of the galaxy. They had one thing in common. They all understood that the Council could not survive without humanity, and they were willing to do whatever it took to bring the humans back. "The situation is worse than we thought," reported Pell, the young Nasari who had become Grandmother Ven's most trusted assistant. 3 more species announced this morning that they are considering following humanity out of the Council. The Rathani, the Voss Collective, and the Frontier Alliance have all sent formal notices that they are reviewing their membership. Grandmother Ven nodded slowly. Her body was small and fragile, but her mind was as sharp as it had ever been. "It is as I predicted. The humans are not the only species that has been mistreated by the major powers. They were simply the first to have the courage to walk away." A Marathi diplomat named Tessic raised one of his tentacles. "What do we do? If more species leave, the Council will collapse completely. Trade routes will close. Defense agreements will end. We could be looking at chaos across the entire galaxy. Then we must act quickly, Grandmother Ven replied. We must convince the humans to return before others decide to follow their example. And we must offer them terms that they cannot refuse. But Praxis will never agree to that, Pell objected. The Velnoxy have too much influence. They will block any proposal that gives the humans real power. A thin smile crossed Grandmother Ven's ancient face. Then we must find a way to work around the Velnoxy. The Council has rules, but rules can be bent when survival is at stake. While the politicians argued and planned, the ordinary beings of the galaxy were already feeling the effects of the human withdrawal. On the transport station of Nexus 7, a major hub for cargo ships, traveling between the inner and outer sectors, the situation had become critical. Station Manager Korath, a heavy-set Sindari with patches of gray in his brown fur, stood in the control center watching ship after ship power down their engines. How many have left? He asked his operations chief. 47 human freighters in the past 2 days, came the reply. They are returning to Earth or to human colonies. They say they will not carry goods until the political situation is resolved. Korath growled low in his throat. Do they understand what this means? Millions of tons of cargo sitting in warehouses with no way to move it. Colonies waiting for supplies that will never arrive. People will starve. They understand, the operations chief said quietly. They just do not care anymore. After the way we treated them, can you blame them? Korath had no answer to that. He had worked alongside human crews for 20 years. He had shared meals with them, celebrated their holidays, mourned their losses. He had always thought of them as friends. But he had also stayed silent when the council passed laws that hurt them. He had looked the other way when human workers were paid less than others for the same work. He had told himself that these were political matters, not his concern. Now he was paying the price for that silence. On the human colony world of New Portland, the mood was very different. The streets were filled with celebration. People gathered in parks and public squares, waving flags and singing songs about freedom and independence. After 200 years of trying to fit into a galaxy that did not want them, humans finally felt like they were in control of their own destiny. Governor Elena Marsh stood on the balcony of the Colonial Administration building, looking out at the crowds below. She was a practical woman, not given to emotional displays. But even she felt a surge of pride at what she saw. Her advisor, a middle-aged man named Paul Dixon, stood beside her with a tablet in his hands. Governor, we are receiving messages from human communities across the galaxy. The response is overwhelmingly positive. People feel like we finally stood up for ourselves. And the economic projections? Elena asked. Paul's expression grew more serious. In the short term, there will be difficulties. Many human businesses depend on council trade routes. If those routes close, some companies will fail. Unemployment will rise. There will be hardship. And in the long term? In the long term, we adapt. Paul allowed himself a small smile. That is what we do, Governor. That is what we have always done. The Council forgets that we built our civilization from nothing. We can do it again if we have to. Elena nodded slowly. She thought about the generations of humans who had worked and struggled and sacrificed to earn a place among the stars. They had faced every challenge the galaxy could throw at them, and they had survived. They would survive this too. Back at the council station, High Arbiter Zelthos finally called for a recess. The delegates filed out of the chamber, exhausted and dispirited. The great hall that had once symbolized unity and cooperation now felt like a battlefield. Zelthos remained at his platform, staring at the empty seats where the human delegation had once sat. Such a small section, compared to the vast territories claimed by older species. Such a young race, compared to civilizations that had existed for millions of years, and yet their absence had created a wound that might never heal. His personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. He looked at the sender and felt his scales shift to a color that had no name in any language but his own. It was from Ambassador Caroline Webb. The message was simple. When you are ready to talk seriously, we will be waiting. Zelthos read those words 3 times. Then he began to compose a reply, Way Station Gamma floated in the darkness between stars. A massive structure built by an ancient species that had vanished long before humanity learned to make fire. It served as neutral territory, a place where enemies could meet without fear of attack. Ambassador Caroline Webb had chosen it carefully for that exact reason. She stood on the observation deck, watching the endless void through transparent walls that were stronger than any metal. Stars glittered in the distance like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there, trillions of beings lived their lives, unaware of the decisions being made that would affect their futures. Behind her, Danny Ortiz was organizing the latest batch of messages from council members. "Ma'am, the offers keep getting better. The Marathi have added 3 more gas giants to their proposal. The Sindari are now offering a permanent trade corridor with 0 tariffs. Even some of the minor species are sending gifts and promises." Caroline did not turn around. "What about the Velnoxi?" Danny hesitated. "Their message is ... different. Praxis claims that humanity is making a terrible mistake. He says that if we do not return to negotiations immediately, the Council will be forced to take defensive measures."
Defensive measures?
Caroline laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Even now, he cannot stop making threats. Does he really believe that intimidation will work after everything that has happened?" "I think he believes his own importance too much to see reality," Danny replied. The door to the observation deck slid open, and Linda Patterson entered. The chief advisor looked tired but determined. She had been working around the clock to coordinate the human response to the crisis, managing communications with Earth, the colonies, and the hundreds of human businesses that were caught in the middle of the political chaos. "Ambassador, I have the latest reports from home," Linda said. "Public support remains strong. The colonial governors have all signed a joint statement endorsing our position, and the military has confirmed that our defense forces are fully operational if needed." Caroline finally turned away from the stars. "Let us hope it does not come to that. War would destroy everything we have worked for." Commander Kyle Bennett entered the room next. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that rarely showed emotion. As the military liaison, his job was to assess threats and prepare for the worst possible outcomes. "Ambassador, I have completed my analysis. If the Council attempts military action against humanity, we can defend ourselves. Our ships are faster and more adaptable than most of their fleets, but a prolonged conflict would devastate both sides. The Council knows this," Caroline said. "That is why they are offering so much to bring us back. They cannot afford a war any more than we can. Then why are we waiting?" Danny asked. "If they are willing to give us everything we want, why not accept and end this crisis?" Caroline looked at her young assistant with something like fondness. He was smart and dedicated, but he had not yet learned the most important lesson of diplomacy. Timing was everything. "Because they are not offering what we really want," she explained. "They are offering trade rights and territory and economic benefits. Those things are valuable, but they are not enough. What we need is respect. We need them to see us as equals, not as a problem to be solved with gifts and promises." Linda nodded in agreement. "If we accept too quickly, they will think we were bluffing. They will believe that we can be bought. In a year or 2, they will find new excuses to limit us, and we will be right back where we started." "So we wait," Kyle said. "We let them feel the pain of our absence. We let them understand what they have lost." "Exactly." Caroline moved to a nearby table and poured herself a glass of water. Her throat was dry from too many speeches and too little rest. "We wait until they are ready to treat us as partners, not as servants. And then we negotiate from strength." A chime sounded from Danny's datapad. He looked at it, and his eyes widened. "Ma'am, High Arbiter Zelthos is requesting a personal audience. Just you and him, no advisors, no guards. He wants to meet on the neutral moon in this system." Caroline set down her glass. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Zelthos was the leader of the council, the one being with enough authority to make real changes. If he was willing to meet privately, it meant he was ready to discuss serious terms. "Tell him I accept," she said. "Tomorrow at noon station time?" The next morning, Caroline prepared for the meeting alone. She dressed in a simple suit, dark blue with minimal decoration. No symbols of rank or authority. She wanted Zelthos to see her as a person, not as a representative of human power. Her shuttle was a small craft, barely large enough for a single passenger and a pilot. She flew it herself, guiding the vehicle down through the thin atmosphere of the neutral moon until she landed on a flat plain of gray rock. Zelthos arrived minutes later. His ship was larger and more ornate, covered in symbols that represented his office and his species. When he emerged and walked toward her across the barren landscape, Caroline was struck by how old he looked. The weight of responsibility had worn him down. They met in the middle of the plain. Two beings from different worlds standing face to face under an alien sky. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Zelthos made a gesture that Caroline recognized. It was a Kathrani sign reserved for equals, an acknowledgement of mutual respect. In all the years that humanity had dealt with the Council, no High Arbiter had ever made that gesture to a human. Ambassador Webb, Zelthos said, his translator rendering his words with careful precision. I have come to speak honestly with you, not as the High Arbiter of the Council, but as one leader to another. Caroline returned the gesture as best she could. I am listening, Arbiter. The Council is failing, Zelthos said. Not because of human withdrawal, though that has accelerated the process. We have been failing for centuries. We became arrogant. We convinced ourselves that we were the center of the universe, that all other species existed to serve our interests. We forgot the principles that brought us together in the first place. He paused, his scales shifting through colors that his translator could not express. When your people first came to the stars, we saw you as a curiosity. A young species, energetic but primitive. We thought we could guide you, shape you, control you. We did not understand that you were different from the others. You do not wait for permission. You do not accept limits. You simply find a way forward, no matter what obstacles stand in your path. Caroline listened without interrupting. She had spent years dealing with council representatives who talked without saying anything. Zelthos was different. He was speaking from the heart. I have made mistakes, the High Arbiter continued. I allowed the Velnoxi to push their agenda because it was easier than fighting them. I ignored the warnings from wiser voices because I did not want to admit that our system was broken. I treated your people unfairly because I was afraid of what you might become. And now? Caroline asked. Zelthos met her eyes directly. Now I am asking for another chance. Not for the Council as it was, but for what it could be. A true partnership between all species. Equal rights for everyone, including humanity. Real representation in every decision that affects your people. Those are fine words, Caroline said carefully. But I have heard fine words before. What makes this different? Because I am willing to put everything on the line to make it happen? Zelthos straightened to his full height. Tomorrow, I will address the Council. I will call for a complete restructuring of our alliance. Full membership for humanity. Voting rights. Access to all trade routes. And a human representative in the inner circle with permanent authority equal to any other member. Caroline felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her face calm. The Velnoxi will never accept that. The Velnoxi do not have a choice. 17 species have already joined Grandmother Ven's coalition. More are considering it. If Praxis tries to block these reforms, he will find himself isolated and outvoted. Paused. The question is whether you are willing to accept our offer and help us build something better. Caroline thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The years of insults and setbacks. The frustrated dreams of human pioneers who had been told they would never be good enough. The pride in her people's eyes when she had finally walked out of that chamber. We have conditions, she said. Zelthos nodded. I expected nothing less. These reforms cannot apply only to humanity. Every species that has been marginalized by the Council must be included. The small ones. The young ones. Everyone who has been pushed aside by the major powers agreed. And the Velnoxi must publicly retract their territorial claims. No more threats. No more intimidation. Zelthos hesitated for just a moment. That will be difficult. Praxis will resist. Caroline allowed herself a small smile. Then I suggest you find a way to make it happen, Arbiter. Those are our terms. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Zelthos looked at it for a long moment, then reached out with his own appendage and grasped it carefully. We have a deal, Ambassador Webb. Above them, the stars shone down on the beginning of a new era. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so crowded. Every seat was filled. Every corridor was packed with beings who had traveled across the galaxy to witness this moment. News drones floated through the air, broadcasting the scene to trillions of viewers on thousands of worlds. History was about to be made, and everyone wanted to see it happen. Ambassador Caroline Webb sat in the human section, but it was no longer the small area near the back of the chamber. Her delegation had been moved to a prominent position near the center, close to the elevated platform where High Arbiter Zelthos stood. The symbolism was obvious to everyone present. Danny Ortiz sat beside her, his datapad ready to record every detail. Linda Patterson was on her other side, calm and composed as always. Commander Kyle Bennett stood at attention behind them, his uniform decorated with the medals he had earned during his years of service. The chamber fell silent as Zelthos raised his hand for attention. His scales shifted through a pattern of deep blue and gold, colors that represented solemn authority among his people. Representatives of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. We have gathered today to address the greatest crisis our alliance has faced in 10,000 years. A crisis that was not caused by outside enemies or natural disasters, but by our own failures, our own arrogance, our own refusal to live up to the principles that brought us together. He paused, letting his words sink in. For 2 centuries, humanity has sought to join our community as equal partners. They offered us their knowledge, their skills, their friendship. And how did we respond? With restrictions, with insults, with endless delays designed to keep them in their place. We treated them as children when they were building wonders we could barely imagine. We called them primitive while they solved problems that had defeated us for millennia. Praxis, the Velnoxy representative, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His crystal body pulsed with colors that suggested anger and embarrassment. Around him, former allies carefully avoided looking in his direction. When Ambassador Webb led her delegation out of this chamber, she forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth, Zelthos continued. Humanity does not need us. They never did. They joined the Council because they believed in cooperation and partnership. They stayed despite our mistreatment because they hoped we would eventually see their worth. And they left because we proved again and again that we were not worthy of their faith. The High Arbiter turned to look directly at Caroline. Today, we have an opportunity to make things right. Not with words or promises, but with action. Humanity has agreed to return to the Council, but only if we commit to real and lasting change. I believe that change is not just necessary, but long overdue. He raised a document that glowed with embedded data. I present to the Council the new Charter of Galactic Unity. This document establishes full and equal membership for humanity and for every other species that has been marginalized by our current system. It guarantees voting rights, trade access, and territorial expansion based on merit rather than seniority. It creates a new inner circle with permanent representation for all major species groups, including humanity. And it includes a formal apology from this Council for the wrongs we have committed. The chamber erupted into noise. Some delegates cheered. Others shouted objections. The Marathi ambassador Valatha rose to express her support. The Sindari trade minister Harath added his voice to hers. One by one, species that had been waiting for this moment stood and declared their agreement. Praxis finally found his voice. This is madness, he declared, his crystal body flashing with angry light. You are handing control of the galaxy to a species that has barely learned to walk among the stars. The Velnoxy will never accept these terms. Grandmother Ven, the ancient Kazori diplomat, rose slowly from her seat. Her small body seemed fragile in the vast chamber, but her voice carried clearly. Then the Velnoxy may leave, Representative Praxis. You will find that you need us far more than we need you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Praxis looked around the chamber, searching for support. He found none. Even species that had traditionally aligned with the Velnoxi remained silent. The political ground had shifted beneath him, and he had been too blind to see it coming. "This vote will proceed," Zelthos announced. "All those in favor of the new charter, please signal your support." Lights began to appear across the chamber. Blue for yes, red for no. The blue light spread like a wave, starting with the smaller species and growing to include nearly every major delegation. When the count was complete, the result was overwhelming. Only the Velnoxi and a handful of their closest allies had voted against the charter. Caroline felt tears forming in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. 200 years of struggle, generations of humans who had worked and hoped and dreamed of this moment, all of it had led to this single instant when humanity finally took its rightful place among the stars. Zelthos turned to face her. "Ambassador Webb, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I offer you a formal apology for the wrongs committed against your people. I invite humanity to join our alliance as full and equal partners, and I ask you to accept a permanent seat on the inner circle, where your voice will carry the same weight as any other." Caroline rose from her seat and walked toward the central platform. The chamber was silent, except for the soft sound of her footsteps. When she reached Zelthos, she looked up at his towering form and felt no fear, no intimidation. They were equals now, and both of them knew it. "Hi, Arbiter," she said, her voice steady and clear. "On behalf of humanity, I accept your apology and your offer. We join this council not as servants or supplicants, but as partners committed to building a better future for all species. We bring our strength, our creativity, and our determination. We ask only that you meet us with the same honesty and respect." She paused and looked out at the vast assembly. Humanity has always believed that the stars belong to everyone. Today, that belief becomes reality. Let us move forward together, learning from our mistakes and working toward a galaxy where every species can thrive. The past cannot be changed, but the future is ours to create. The chamber exploded into applause. Delegates from dozens of species rose to their feet. The Maraudi waved their tentacles in celebration. The Sindari howled with joy. Even the usually reserved Kathroni allowed their scales to shift through bright patterns of happiness and relief. Carolyn returned to her seat, where Danny was openly crying and Linda was smiling wider than anyone had ever seen. Kyle Bennett stood at attention, but there was pride in his eyes that spoke louder than any words. On Earth, billions of people watched the broadcast and celebrated in the streets. On New Portland, Governor Alina Marsh ordered a planetary holiday. On stations and ships and colonies across human space, families gathered to mark the moment when everything changed. And in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, a small delegation from a young species took their place among the ancient powers of the galaxy. They had come as outsiders and been treated as inferiors. They had endured insults and injustice with patience and determination. And when the time came, they had found the courage to walk away, forcing an entire civilization to reconsider its assumptions. Humanity had finally arrived. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple act of refusing to accept anything less than they deserved. It was a victory that would echo through the ages, inspiring countless others to stand up for their own rights and dignity. As the celebration continued around her, Caroline Webb allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about all the humans who had come before her, pioneers and dreamers who had reached for the stars without knowing if they would ever be welcomed among them. She hoped they would be proud of what their descendants had achieved. The stars waited outside, endless and full of possibility. And for the first time in 200 years, humanity was ready to explore them as equals. The future had finally begun.